My name's Alison Woolf, and I am passionate about play, and I'm involved with it in several different ways as a play therapist and as an educator, currently working in university teaching teachers and also working on a master's in play policy and practice. So looking at play right from play with the child to the bigger structures around play and how we're all influenced by that and how things could be different and why being different might be good. So writing my book Better Play was about hoping to help school staff to see play in a different way, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to keep doing all the great things that we know going on in schools all the time, but also to think about the language you use and what the word play might mean. And when we start to be curious about that, we may find that we can use play in different ways to add to all the things that we already do. I certainly hope that people will be inspired to think about their own play and how they play, what play means to them, and also to think about why play has always been acknowledged to be so important in child development, and how sometimes we've narrowed that down a bit to think about play as a tool or a vehicle for learning, but play can be so much more than that, and how when children choose their own play, as an educator myself, I might have found that a bit frustrating at times. And if I can let go of that and help other people to let go of it and see what's really happening there, then that would be wonderful if the book Better Play could do that for people working in education. The first thing that's coming into my head when I ask that question at the moment is thinking about risk and how important play is for us to take risks and to learn about risks and to learn about risk assessment. And if we take that out of the hands of children because we always do that micromanagement for them, then I think we're denying the children the possibilities to learn things that can be so vital for them. I suppose that I think taking a risk when you're very young is probably a small risk and you might learn a lot. Taking a risk later on, if people have shielded you from the possibility of taking early risks, might mean that the first risk you take could have some more serious consequences. So I think allowing younger children to take risks is really important. Allowing myself to take a risk by letting someone else take a risk is a challenge that I have to recognize in myself, but sometimes it's about my feelings rather than the player's feelings about that risk. So there's a lot going on, I think, about play, about the adult and their feelings and their thoughts and beliefs and the child. And sometimes we forget to be curious about ourselves as well.
So in your book, you talk about this, don't you, in terms of how the adult can manage their own experience, perhaps their own experiences of play that they've had that may now be limiting how they're seeing what the child is exploring and what the child is doing.
I do, and I think coming to my book, having had the experience of being trained as a play therapist after having been an early years educator, really helped me to see play in some different ways and hopefully to be able to pass on some of that information to people, to add, as I say, to add to their great practice. And thinking about myself and my own play experiences, I might have planned for a lot of experiences that were the play that I liked. So it's about saying there's other sorts of play out there, and remember that other people like different sorts of play, and children should have a range of opportunities for play so they can find out about themselves.
Yeah. So what do you see in terms of the different areas of play? Perhaps you could just go through the different areas of play for us and talk about what do you see as working well in schools, and what is your book intended to help schools to develop, to do better?
I suppose the obvious delineation would be about indoor play and outdoor play and what we provide in terms of opportunities for both those particular areas. And immediately I'm thinking how different that is at different ages. So thinking about how in early years, all the nations within the UK have really come to recognise the importance of play and providing lots of play opportunities, resources, space in early years education is a premium, and really understood that children need that space and that time to play. And then unfortunately we seem to think that's it. And when we're moving into sort of even older infants and junior and sort of key stage 2 and then key stage 3, we seem to think that maybe outdoors play is enough and that's all that's necessary. So I think providing more space and more time for indoor play for children as they get older would be really, really important. And also to recognise what is play for older children as well, that play changes and play can become playfulness. And sometimes we interpret that as something that might be disruptive or might be cheeky or rude. And sometimes it's playfulness. And when we reframe that for school staff, then I think that they're much more encouraged to adopt playfulness within classrooms for the older children, both in Key Stage 2 and then throughout both secondary and tertiary education, which is something that I'm very interested in as well. So hopefully in the book, there'll be something about raising the curiosity about some play provision for older children indoors as well as outdoor play, and some outdoor play that maybe isn't organised games or something that's two structures as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's go right back to the beginning, really, about play, and just have a think about where does play come from? Where's this instinct to play? Because I know that you're very fond of animals. Just tell me why you're interested in it, but also why did children need to play? Why do young people need to play? In your view, do adults still need to play? Why is it? Why do you see it? And I know you talk about this in the book such a lot. Why do you see it as so fundamental to the human spirit to play?
Something that's fascinating, because we're discovering new things all of the time about the neuroscience of play and why it's important. And sadly, through experiences of some children, we're learning about what happens when we don't play, which informs us on the importance of play. So I think by offering staff in education through my book an insight into what lots of different people are saying about play might help us to unpack little bit more about why it is so important for children, and some lovely research now as I'm reaching an older age group to see that it's still really important for both our physical health and our emotional and particularly our social health. So play is so vital for human beings, and as you say, we've learned a lot by looking at the animal kingdom. And I think if anyone's got a puppy or had a puppy, they'll know that dogs really, really use their play to develop lots of social skills with other dogs. And much of the research that we've been able to find out about the neuroscience has been with rats as well, and how important play is for animals in general. And we really need to understand that that animal need is within us still, to be playful and to experience play at every stage of life, but particularly at childhood. And some people might say that we have a long childhood so that we can have long experiences of play as human beings, because play is so essential to our development. I think but probably most of us recognise the physical skills that we develop through play, and that how the body movement of play is so important. But sometimes we might shy away from some of the really close physical play that is important for children, and that kind of rough and tumble play, which has maybe gone out of fashion and hopefully is coming back into our consciousness, really, about how important that close physical rough and tumble play is. The reason that rough and tumble play is so important is, one, immediately I want to say that as human beings, and this is difficult at this time to talk about, we all need physical contact with other human beings. That's so important. And sometimes, particularly for older children, that might be the most appropriate way that they see that they can get that close physical contact with their peers. Also, I think that judgment of our own physical space and how appropriate it is to be in someone else's physical space, and also to notice. There's a lovely rule about physical play, that there's a 50-50 rule, that I could win 50% of the time, but you must also win 50% of the time. And I think that sort of give and take, and the social play and the physical space play kind of marry with each other, so they're both going on at the same time. So I think for physical play, the rough and tumble is really important, as well as all the skills that we learn through cutting and painting and all those kind of fine motor skills. There's the gross motor skills about, if I bump into you, will that be okay? If you bump into me, how will that feel? So I think that those things are developed in physical play. And if we haven't had it, it's hard to imagine how we're going to accommodate close physical contact later on and feel comfortable with it, and also not get too close and notice when for other people that's not what they want to see in us. So there's the physical side of play. The emotional side of play, really interesting to think about the range of emotions that we can experience in play. And sometimes we think play has to be fun. And if you read Better Play, then you'll see that there's lots of people who also say, no, play doesn't have to be fun, including Bob Hughes, who says, sometimes you want to be miserable. and you don't want to be rescued from that feeling. And also some of the less obvious types of play. I was listening to a program the other day on Radio 4 called Forethought, where Tiffany Atkins talked about the non-cathartic elements of play. So we may see play and think, oh, it's really good for them to get that out. But also in play, it's really good to just learn to stay with something, boredom, irritation, frustration. And I think sometimes we really want to rescue children rather than let them wallow in some of those difficult emotions. So I think play is a really helpful time for children to learn to be a bit stuck or to experience some relatively challenging emotions that just have to be gone through and come out the other side of. And social play, I think it's important, obviously, to be able to be alone in this world and to be able to be with others. And play, we know, is one way that we build relationships with others. Research suggests it's also a huge way we repair relationships, which sometimes I think we're not all very good at. And when you become playful with someone again, you kind of think, I think we're okay now. So it's a really good way to see where we are in relationships. You're starting to feel playful with me again now. Phew, it's okay, we're moving on. So I think play is just important for our physical, emotional and social development and life throughout life. I think that we've learned some things from Eastern European countries about what happens when children don't have any access to play, but also, interestingly, about what happens when countries take life very seriously and it isn't playful. And the aim is that everyone takes life very seriously and does the right thing and adds to the community, but forgets that actually part of doing the right thing and being a community is being playful. I think if we don't have access to play, then our physical development is bound to be delayed. Our emotional development, we don't have those rich experiences of going into emotional feelings and coming out of them and sharing them or having them on our own. And also that social side is bound to be really affected when we don't get to play. And I think that we're really learning that there are things that we can do to make up for some of those deficits. And in the book, in Better Play, we do think about how that it's not all doom and gloom, that the neuroscience suggests that there are particular stages in adolescence where we can help to repair some of those damages. But I think that lack of play overall, I don't think anyone would doubt that that would be detrimental, but small lacks of different kinds of play is also going to be detrimental. That if we haven't played in certain ways or with certain things or with other people or on our own, then there'll be some specific deficits. And one of the wonderful things about play is it's also an assessment. So wanting to find out what those deficits or difficulties or delays might be, then when we learn to really observe play, then it may be laid out there for us that we can see what are the missing pieces or what hasn't happened or where the needs are. So play might be called the diagnosis or the stethoscope, and it also might be called the cure or the pills. So two things can be going on at once when we play, and it's really important to see that global play, a lack of global play, hopefully for us here in our schools might not be something that we see, but we may see some specific lacks of play in children, and we may be able to support that because when we've seen it and noticed it, we may be able to encourage and facilitate those kind of opportunities for children. I think one of the huge things that's need to change in play policy is to recognise the need for play as we age. And it's not just about early years development, but that we all need play. And I think that needs to be recognised. I think things are changing. We know that there are lots of international and national projects to provide more play within communities outside of education. But maybe that needs to be filtered more into design within schools for spaces and places, and also design within the timetable. I mean, if we look at Finland and think that between every lesson they have a mini playtime, and how wonderful it might be if we could do something as creative and different as that. But I do think that small changes make huge differences, and I think policy needs to be created by people with a bit more understanding about play and playfulness, and just give a little space. Having said that, we know that children can be quite subversive and they will play. And that's another wonderful thing about play, that the need is so great that despite all the policies in the world, children will find the time and the space to play. And part of the playfulness is about going against the rules and doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. So we mustn't stop that either.
When you describe it like that, it makes me see play as some kind of irresistible force. Like yesterday I was watching a wonderful TED talk about 7 ways that fungi can save the planet or something, and it's this mitochondrial network of links or something that is just always going to be there, or the plant life that will always come up through the cement and will always find the cracks and will always come up, and that kind of wilderness element of play coming out of the formal and going into that informal improvisational space where we never quite know what's going to happen. That life force of play, in a way, the way you're describing it sounds like it's always going to be coming in somewhere, and that children are bound to be the people at the forefront of that. But maybe there's something about within a healthy human and a healthy adult that somehow that will always kind of come in somewhere. I'm very tempted to do silly things now. Yeah, when you speak about that, that sounds like the lovely rebel energy of play as well.
I think most of us can recognize that sense of, oh, I got away with that, or I don't think anyone noticed. And that social thing about you and I know that this is happening and yet nobody else does. I think that's very playful as well, that we can be subversive and connect with someone else in that moment of subversion and feel that we got away with it.
Yes, there's a kind of delicious little kind of mischievous thing, isn't there? Which definitely, when you spoke about animals' need to play, they know that they're doing it, and it's not I know that you know, kind of joint collaborative thing.
I think most of people who work in education who might be interested in reading Better Play will probably understand that we have sort of got a progression of play, where we think that we'd be able to play alone, then play alongside before we'd be able to play with. And I think that's a really important thing to know, because why would we think a child who hasn't had play experiences alone or with one other person could suddenly play in a group of 10 and manage it? So I think it's really important to sort of think about it in steps and in bite sizes. But I think sometimes we forget that playing alone is a really important thing for us to be able to tolerate or be able to usefully do. And I think, thinking back to my own adolescence, that I'm bored would be something that I would say a lot. So I think being able to fill my time myself is a really important thing for my mental health, that I can enjoy play, whatever that might be for me when I'm alone. And also that sense of sharing play, where some of the elements of ourselves can come out that we don't normally maybe access, where we might be able to be a leader in play where we don't usually do that in the workplace, or we may be able to be a follower in play, whereas maybe in our workplace that isn't something we get to do. So play really lets us access lots of different parts of ourselves that we don't normally get the chance to exercise, and see if that's something that we'd like to develop more, or just think, no, I think I am someone who should be in this role because I didn't really enjoy that. So I think social play is really important for ourselves. And also we know from research that social play is really important for cohesive communities. And when you think about your class sitting around at story time, that shared sense of doing something together, absorbing something together, creating an artwork together as a class is really, really important, just as it is my own artwork, which is so important because then it's mine and it expresses me. But it's really important to do something together as well. So we need to have a blend of opportunities for playing alone, opportunities for playing with one other person, where you're really having that intimate sharing and that collaboration and cooperation, or a larger group thing where we really do immerse ourselves in creating something together as a group and seeing that as more important in that moment than what we might want to do for ourselves. So personally, I think play alone, play in pairs, play in small groups and play in large groups is something that we should have evenly distributed through the timetabling in our schools, because all of those things are really, really important. I think if I talk about this outside of the current situation, because I do understand that things have changed considerably in the need for online play when we're not able to access play together. In the book, I talk about the play diet and how important it is that we have different kinds of play, and online play would be part of that. And my concerns, and I'm sure a lot of parents' concerns, would be when that becomes out of ratio with other kinds of play. So the online play is an additional thing. And again, thinking about how subversive that can be, how children will surely want to play in ways that their parents didn't play or don't see us play, because that's the whole point really about the different generations, that we're different and that we have something that's ours and that's exclusive. So online play is wonderfully exclusive for people whose parents haven't had that. And I know that that's sort of working its way through, because now we have parents and children who can enjoy playing together online because it's something that they both really enjoy doing. So it becomes a different kind of social experience. And children playing online is a way for us to be in contact with people when we can't actually physically be there, and also to make contacts with people that we wouldn't normally come across. So the benefits are huge, and there is research to say that our civic duty can be enhanced by playing online and being parts of community, alongside all the research that say there are some dangers, obviously the safeguarding dangers of playing online, also the dangers of spending too much time playing online and forgetting that there's other kinds of play that we need to engage in. And I think we'll learn a lot more about how possible it is to develop empathy and to really understand the nuances of relationships online, and how easy it is to really have that same kind of connection online as it might be in person. But I think as part of a varied play diet, it's a wonderful new way for children to really explore their world and themselves. I suppose that one of the perfect counterparts to online play is outdoors play. And again, the research about how human beings interacting in green spaces is so important for our mental health.
Compelling.
Absolutely. So I think outdoor play would be one of the most important things that we need to experience. Play alone would be part of my play diet, that I would think everyone needs to be able to tolerate or enjoy that. Play in groups is really essential, again, for the social well-being and for the different kind of play that opportunity gives us, and also for understanding more about ourselves when we take on roles within groups. Creative and imaginative play, I think we haven't recognised how much of that is going on all the time. And I love David Allen's idea about needing that kind of daydreaming space in schools, and how that play is really important, where we suddenly realise, oh, I disappeared then for a moment and we didn't really realise that we were playing. We were having that little play space and playtime. So I think some kind of imaginary play doesn't necessarily have to be playing with imaginary resources. We don't need figures or sand trays or dolls' houses. It can be internal imaginary play. So I think creativity, imagination, physicality, the senses, all of that is addressing every area of our being through play would be my idea for a colourful plate.
Tell us about rules and rule breaking in play, because sometimes I know as an adult we might be watching children playing and we're thinking, oh dear, that's not necessarily very fair, they're breaking the rules. But on the other hand, that's a different kind of play. Some play works best when there are rules, some play isn't about rules. So what are children learning about rules, and how do we as adults need to navigate the space of observing it, but not imposing or being too allowing the mistakes when they happen, or allowing children to experiment with what happens when a rule does get broken amongst them? So you speak about those things.
That's such an interesting question, and again something that I do cover in the book, because it's really interesting to think about. If play has to be self-chosen and has to erupt from within, then how can that be playing with rules? And yet research suggests that children actually like to make rules to make things harder for them, because that sense of achievement in play when they've created rules so that they can see how far they can go within those rules can be something that can be really important for them. And children can compete against themselves with those rules in a solo play, just like they can in a group play. However, breaking rules is another thing that we know that children really enjoy in play. And I think that can be quite difficult, as you say, for an adult observing. And another thing that we do believe about play is that play has to be felt and experienced as play by everybody who's playing, but not necessarily by the people who are watching. It's not up to me to watch play and say whether it's play or not. It's up to the players to know themselves whether they think they're playing or not. So it can feel really difficult if some children want to have different rules or break the rules, and other children really want the rules to stick and be part of the game that they're playing. And I think that's one of the beauties about, in the book, when we think about the skills, in Better Play, we think about the skills for an adult playing with a child. That might be the perfect opportunity for them to have a game that should have rules, that we might know the rules, snakes and ladders, snap, but where the child can make up their own rules, break the rules, get whatever it is that they need out of that game of rules. And when you asked me that question, Andrew, I thought immediately of Bo Lotto. I don't know if you've seen him, a wonderful speaker who talks about science is just play with rules. And yet we need rule breakers in science, just like we do in any kind of forward development of humankind, that we need rule breakers. So I think understanding that some games have rules and that sometimes we can break them, both those things can be really important. And I think as an adult, sometimes we might say that the game needs to be played by the rules, because that might be what those players really need, or the majority of those players. And other times we're going to allow children to break the rules because we need children who can be that creative and can change things and make up their own rules.
And I guess that if you're observing play as an adult and trying to contain your wish to impose the rules, what you're, if you do the containing and you do the imposition, you're denying children the opportunity to learn to negotiate between them to work out what the rule is going to be for them. On the other hand, of course, there's safeguarding. We need to make sure that that's within a certain limit. And I guess that there's a difference, isn't there, that between the child who it's going to tell us a lot if we see a child who always needs to have the rules because that's the only way they stay safe, versus down the other end, a child who can't tolerate any rules at all and will always want to be anarchic and disruptive or change, or because they can't bear anyone else to control. So I guess we're talking about the spectrum, aren't we, between those two, which we might say if they are driven by the need to hang on to those two ends of the spectrum, maybe they're not, that they've missed a play experience of tolerating the opposite somehow. Would that be fair?
I think, as we said earlier, that we can learn a lot from observing children and their needs that come through in the play, and that we need then to provide appropriate times for them to meet those needs, and also times for them to tolerate not having those needs met. And group play for an adult is obviously going to have some difficulties about meeting the needs of an individual child versus meeting the needs of the group. And I think that most of us who work with groups of children are really used to kind of living with that tension, but sometimes remembering, so I need to make some appropriate time for that child to have that experience where they may be able to do that rule breaking, which perhaps they haven't done before. And in Better Play, I also talk about the skills that sometimes children don't know that they're repeating those behaviors. So sometimes reflecting with them absolutely non-judgmentally that feels like it's really important for you to win every time, feels like when we've played this game that's felt so important for you to win, might help them to see, I didn't realize, and that is me she's talking about. And again, it's really important that when we use skills like the reflections, that we think about the fact that that's what it is. It's not a judgment, it's just a reflection. This is what's happening now. And then we may move on to say, right now it's really, this game is really about seeing if we can all follow the rules today to get where we need to be at the end. And other times it might be, wow, never played the rule with these games before, look what's happening. So, wow, don't we have to juggle so much when we're working with groups of children, or even an individual child, to make sure that this global need for play is met appropriately, in appropriate ways, in appropriate times. And sometimes we are amazing at holding on to the fact that we've noticed something and that now is not the time to do anything about it, but there will be a time when we will do something about that for that child.
So if you were to visit a school, Alison, and you saw their facilities, what would tell you about the built environment? What would say to you, this school really values play? What would you see?
I guess that when I go into a school, I do get a sense, something about the, not the built environment immediately, it's kind of that ethos in the air about something about that school. But I think I would be looking for somewhere that was engaging and stimulating and had sort of the sensory input, that there was lots going on, but not too manicured. And it makes me think of a garden. You'd want it to look colourful, but you wouldn't want it to look so perfect that you wouldn't dare go out there. And I'm thinking about resources, that sometimes the resources might be overly perfected, that they're clearly for a purpose, and that they're categorized, and outside play is all about you do this here and you do that there, whereas some kind of blurring of the lines might make me think, oh, there's some kind of sense of children could be a bit creative and a bit free. And I think that might be a word I'd be looking for. Is there some sense of freedom within this built environment, that kind of it's not too edged and too perfect, and that there's some kind of flow going on? Flow is a wonderful word for anything to do with play, and the sense of movement as having some kind of flow, and not too constrained and constricted outside and inside. Outside, I'd want to see some kind of sense of natural play, and some kind of sense of greenery, and some kind of sense of some of the resources were natural materials and not all sort of brightly coloured plastic materials. And again, inside, I'd like to see something outside brought in. I'd like to see some kind of life in there, sort of some kind of greenery maybe. Takes me back to when I was at school, when we were allowed to have all sorts of animals and insects that we used to keep. And I know that that's not something we've been able to do, but some wonderful schools now are keeping chickens in the outside spaces and all sorts of wonderful things like that, for getting in touch with really what it is to be alive and to be part of the environment. I guess I'd like to see that we felt that both outside and inside. The value of children's creative work in schools is always wonderful when you go in. It's just amazing the effort the staff have put in to value children's creative work, the way that it's displayed, the value that children feel that they've been given for what they've created is always makes me feel that that's just something that schools do wonderfully. I think the word play is really interesting, and Liz Brooker has a lovely way of explaining that what teachers maybe talk about as play is so valuable and so important, but maybe it needs another word, because some definitions of play might be that it has to be organic and led by the player and cannot be imposed from without and doesn't need to have an outcome. So I think sometimes the words we use cloud the issue a little bit about adult directed play. Some people might say that's not play, and child directed play, which some people would say was the only kind of play. But I think that we've sometimes used play as a vehicle or a tool and forgotten that play is its own thing. And as we've talked about before, and I talk about a lot in the book, how it bubbles up and comes from within. But we mustn't assume that all children can play. So it's really important that when children come to school, it's their first completely new environment for some of them. So many new opportunities that sometimes they will need some help to play. And so adult directed play can be really helpful. It can be permissive. It can give children who don't know, oh, I could do that sense that, yes, you can do that here. That's what that's for here. So I think adult directed play is really important for facilitating play, giving permission for play, and for helping children to use resources and to maybe use them playfully to come to the outcome that is planned for in that activity. But it's really important to maybe question somehow whether that is play or whether that is something else that's really valuable, important, but maybe is not play. And I know that in schools we're encouraged to value both the adult directed play and the child directed play. And both those things definitely need to happen, because the way that we learn experientially is vital. Maybe calling it play, some people might have an issue with, but experiential learning with resources that looks like play is absolutely essential. But it's also essential that that playfulness that erupts also is given that space to happen, because the two things are doing different things, but it doesn't mean that either of them shouldn't be there. Both of them should definitely be there. I think one thing that we know about play is that it helps us to come to terms with uncertainty, and I think we're all living with uncertainty. We may have found it easier in a way when things are very challenging but certain. But I think play really helps us to deal with uncertainty. I think when children play particularly, they have such a sense of mastery and control over that world that they're in at that moment, when we don't have mastery or control over the bigger world that we have to live in at the moment. So times when we do feel we have mastery and control are just so soothing for the soul at the moment. The sense that, yes, I can control what happens in the play. And that sense of, it makes sense, I can cope with this, just to have a moment and then go back out into the uncertainty. But I think we know that children play things again and again and again just to understand better. And we probably are all doing that internally without realizing it, that's how we cope, is playing things again and again and again. And particularly for children who maybe can't talk much, maybe can't ask many questions, they may be able to resolve some of that stuff in their play. And I think it's really important as adults that we tolerate seeing some maybe quite uncomfortable play, some play that we think might be addressing some quite difficult emotions, and just staying with and being with and letting children know that we're there, rather than doing too much of the rescuing. And again, it's amazing how we know that balance of when a child might need to be brought out of their play, or to have us come in and maybe help with that play. But also, it's a time when really giving opportunities for play, being within play and observing and being there and making sure that children know we're there, but we don't have to be in charge of their play, because that is for them to be in charge of.
Okay, Alison, so thank you so much for all the different things you've told us about play. It's fascinating, and there's so much more in Better Play. It's a wonderful book. So many resources in your book there for people to go away. And I know when I've read it, I'm so provoked into both thinking, but also actively provoked into going off and being playful. Something of your own playful spirit really infuses your writing, which is wonderful. Plus the introduction of your lovely dog, who appears now and again. How do you play? What are the ways in which you feel you're most in contact with that wonderful, bubbling, rebellious, infectious edge of play in you? How do you allow yourself to do that?
I love being outdoors. Obviously that blends with having the dog as well. So I do love being outdoors, and I love walking. And I've noticed that when I'm walking, I'm quite often thinking, and quite often creating a piece of written work or a poem, never to be written or spoken, but just because it's something I enjoy doing. I love words, and I love making sense of things through thinking about the things, and it sort of helps me to really understand the world by thinking about it, and as if I would write it, or as if I would create a poem. So I think being outdoors and words is something that I really enjoy. I've recently, well, the last 10 years, become really engaged in doing dog agility. And there's something about that directedness, but actually when you're doing it, you are in flow. And the fact that you're together with something else and you're both doing something together is a wonderful experience, I think. So I think play with someone else gives you sort of that wonderful feeling of, we're in this together, we're doing this together. I love, again, outdoors, I love things like snow or autumn leaves. So I think I'm still really enjoy sensory play. And sometimes we don't think of it as play, and that's fine, because it doesn't matter what we think of it as, but taking in the senses of our environment is a wonderful, playful thing to do. And playfulness in relationships, jokes, teasing, as long as both people realize it's teasing and feel comfortable with it. I think that playfulness just makes life, for me, worth living.